Hello, one and all, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor. With me, as always, you know it's Mr. Phil.
Hello?
Two-syllable Phil, as they call him. And thank God, because do we have some important fights to talk to you about this week? Right?
Do we?
Yeah. Dude, that was a question. Did my intonation not make that clear? Do we have some important fights?
Oh, yes. No.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer that one. That's easy.
We figured because we are on the heels right now, or not the heels, we're standing on the toes, I suppose, of an Apex card, in which perhaps the most interesting thing about it was the creation of a new frontrunner for this year's Glue Factory Employee of the Month award in the main event. And we've got no event at all next weekend, at least from the UFC, that we might get into a little bit of a topic later on in the show. And I don't know how to, it's clearly a topic which we basically already had a full segment's worth of discussion about it, Phil. So clearly it's interesting to us. How do I sell it to the listener in a way that does not just sound like something extremely abstract and pointless?
The use of rhythm in fighting?
Yeah. And you use the word rhythm the way differently from I would. I would say, time in fighting, tempo, the gaining of time and the losing of time. But none of these sound sexy in any way. I guess rhythm sounds sexy.
No, they don't.
Rhythm is the sexiest.
Not a sexy week. It's an Apex week, and then we've got a week off, and then we got another Apex.
And a pretty fucking bleak looking one too, if I do say myself. Yeah. So maybe we'll open the topic bag again next week.
Yeah.
We had some
If you have things you would like us to talk about, please.
Yeah, sure. We beg you. But we are going to start off talking about this Apex card. Look, something, albeit unsatisfying to me personally, but momentous, did come out of the main event between Michael Morales and Gilbert Burns, in that we definitely have a new welterweight contender who will be getting other ranked fights in the near future. And we're going to talk about some of the undercard fights as well, probably mostly as briefly as we can make ourselves do so. But, that'll come when it comes. What about Morales versus Burns? First of all, what did you expect going in, Phil? We did not talk about this one last week.
I mean, as I think I might have said when we talked about it outside of the show, that this is the Glue Factory fight. This is exactly what you want when you're booking a fight. You want an old guy who was genuinely good and should be thinking about retirement because he's clearly on the downslope, against a guy who's really athletic and really powerful and has just all the weapons of youth, and who kind of sucks. Yeah, Morales is perhaps the single best example of like a Glue Factory archetype that we've got. I mean, you obviously get ones at higher weight classes all the time, but they don't really count. It's better to be someone at a weight class where people can actually be good and just to be physically overwhelming. And yeah, now that Michel Pereira is gone, Morales is the new man ushering the horses to the pot.
Right.
And my main reads on this were just that he's humongous. He is very young in a way which would make him just, physically difficult to tire out. And that Gilbert Burns is quite small for the weight class and old. and, wasn't super durable at the height of his career.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and Morales hasn't looked like he hasn't made the best decisions when he's been fighting people like Magni.
Mm-hmm.
But he hasn't looked like he's just got a crippling weakness to being out-grappled.
No.
That he's wasn't going to be able to overcome just by being, 25. So yeah, I mostly kind of expected this to be ugly, although I did not expect it to finish in one round.
Yeah. Yeah, he does, just to put a point on it, he does have a wrestling background, and if Wikipedia is to be believed, which, as I learned a long time ago when I interviewed Matt Brown and talked to him about the judo background, he does not have. Mm-hmm. Michael Morales also apparently has a judo background. Wikipedia has it that he has 2 judoka parents, and that was his first martial art before he transitioned to wrestling in school. You can definitely tell he's comfortable there, perhaps too comfortable, in a way that leads to him making strategically bad decisions. But, yeah, that's what makes him the perfect Glue Factory fighter, right? Is that, in an intellectual way, he's actually quite bad at fighting. Like, he throws one shot at a time, he overextends when he throws, he's pretty easy to hit. When he's forced to be defensive, he tends to leap away in massive committal movements, often backwards in a straight line. He can be taken down and wrapped up in grappling exchanges and all these things, and yet he's a monster in the prime of his life, for whom none of these bad decisions actually matter. So to lose to him is really the closest you can come, barring some horrible outcome in the fight itself, to looking death itself in the face. Looking mortality in the face and saying, I'm getting old. This proves to me, or should, that I am getting old, because this is not fair, the way he's beating me right now.
Yep. He is the power of youth incarnate. Yeah, I did find myself looking at this, being like, how mean have we been about Michael Morales?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, on the one hand, he is super young. Like, he's super young. I mean, for a welterweight.
Yeah, he's 25.
He's like 25. This didn't used to actually be super young at welterweight, but it is now. That fighters are simply getting older, lighter, down the divisions. It used to be that like 30 was a sort of starting to get worried age for anyone sort of welterweight and below. Mm-hmm. And now it's simply like, that's just how old all the top fighters are, pretty much. But he is pretty young. He does have good instincts, as in, well, he is a natural fighter in the,
yes.
I mean, like, he's much more unstructured even than, like, Carlos Prates.
Yeah, but in all the ways that Bo Nickel is not, perhaps you were wanting to say. He is a natural fighter.
And yeah, he's been like a very, like, jab-happy fighter without, like, much to follow it up, or like a particularly mechanically beautiful jab. But he quickly figured out that when he was doing it in this fight that Gilbert was just kind of putting the earmuffs up and then started just clipping him with hooks around the guard.
Yep.
So he made adjustments, and I think, this was a faster and more comprehensive performance than I had expected. He did a better job of defending the takedowns. Yeah, what do you think his ceiling is? Do you think his ceiling is just like, he's just Carlos Prates? He's just going to, or his ceiling is maybe perhaps just below Carlos Prates? Because, as I said, Carlos Prates has like decent structure to his game. Or are we like at the risk of just underplaying someone who has, as we said, like freakish physical talents and some actual, and just like good instincts, and that's basically, that can just carry you really, really far.
Well, I will first say that I think we are always in danger of of overly downplaying somebody who has freakish physical talents. You and I specifically, and also anyone else who has a kind of technical analyst bent when it comes to, that's part of how they enjoy MMA. It's hard not for us not to look at Morales and be like, there's so much wrong here. And worse than that, not so much wrong, but so little good. It seems like there's, like so few ideas. Like, it seems very paper thin, but in a very real way, it is not, because of his physicality. And the fact that, this can't be, this can't be overstated either. Look at Bo Nickel. Bo Nickel's a great athlete. Right? But Bo Nickel does not feel a fight going against him and feel a motivating rage within himself to make sure that doesn't happen. And to fight back and to punish you for having success against him. Like, Michael Morales certainly has that. If we want to call that the basic piece of what it means to be a natural fighter, he has the right mentality in that basic way. And he is a huge welterweight who is lightning fast and very powerful and very strong, and also seems, though I don't think people have been able to test it as thoroughly as I would like, but he does seem to have tremendously good conditioning as well.
Yeah.
He's gone into plenty of protracted fights, and mostly because he can't put his shots together well enough to get people out of there all the time, even with his considerable power and size. But because of that, he's gone into a lot of fights that just kind of remain flatly competitive into the third round, and he never seems to slow down or get frustrated or anything else. So there are a lot of things there that make Michael Morales an actually good fighter. Carlos Prates does also have a lot of those things. Carlos Prates is super tough. Look at that fucking Ian Gary fight. That is not a man who gets too frustrated to still try and win, or gets dispirited by a fight going horribly. Like, the man was fighting his ass off in the fourth and fifth rounds of a fight that was all wrong for him in the first 3.5. And he also has power, and he is also a big welterweight. And I think we saw Carlos Prates against just that next level of organization on the part of an opponent, that next level of strategy, falling just short, almost already being good enough to figure that out, and therefore perhaps that one lesson away from being a much better fighter next time we see him. So I do expect that Morales will run up against a wall, but I also have more than enough reason to think he will then exceed whatever point stops him, and possibly very impressively. Whatever it takes to make him think, oh, I have to get better at this thing, he might do that very, very quickly. This is just the superpower of elite athletes that, I don't know if you ever went back and watched it, Phil, but that Damon Blackshear fight I was talking about a few weeks ago, against, Alatang Haile, where Damon Blackshear's a great athlete and has been since he got to the UFC, but was a very stiff, awkward striker. And then literally a month after having had a surprisingly tough fight with Cody Gibson, he just was a boxer. And more than that, was a boxer with a fucking great kicking game. But man was, picking off the jab, shoulder rolling the right hand, blocking the left hook, and then countering and pivoting off of these defensive moves and controlling the range and controlling angles with his jab, and like a fully fledged MMA boxing game that just seemed to come out of nowhere. So that totally does happen, and much more frequently with athletes of this caliber. So yeah, I think right now I'm comfortable saying that there is going to be some ranked welterweight out there who Morales just comes in with like no particularly strong idea of how he's going to win, just sort of assuming that it will happen, and he's going to get outsmarted. But I think he'll probably improve beyond that and get really very good. Seems likely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he has confidence. He has what looks like every kind of physical durability you could ask for. He's never been stopped in his career, which is, rare. And, you can just watch those finishing sequences against, like, Brevin Giles, where he's, like, Morales is just kind of pushing through his punches as he tends to with Giles up against the fence. And Giles is just, like, desperately punching him. And it's just bouncing off him. He's not paying any attention to what's happening to what's coming back at him at all.
Yeah.
Which is, A, bad, but B, is that he doesn't have to.
Right.
Like, he's just effortlessly able to tank the shots and then just splatters him.
Which means he needs to get to quite a high level to learn a lesson that most fighters, even other very good athletes, have to learn pretty early in their careers. I
mean, Carlos Prates, is not that level of durable, frankly. Like, he's much more mortal than Morales, as you can see in his career, of him getting hurt and stopped on, like, multiple occasions.
Mm-hmm.
But Morales, he's just got every physical gift going, and he can just walk through stuff. Which is, as I said, it's good and it's bad.
Yes.
But mostly it's good because, it means he can learn things at his leisure.
Yep. So yeah, I think that's about as optimistic as I can be about Morales. And I think it is pretty optimistic to say, I think he will ultimately become a very good fighter in the ways that even nerds like you and I can appreciate. And he is already just materially quite a very good fighter because he's going in there against experienced, top level opponents and, crushing them.
Yeah.
So,
they're generally old and washed, but they're still good. And I think just the sheer durability, the time to figure stuff out is, perhaps his, one of his best physical gifts, because if you look at, for example, Johnny Walker, as someone who has, every attribute going apart from durability, Johnny Walker could simply find no way of adapting himself into a functional game.
Right.
Because he couldn't take the risks. He couldn't, try and learn anything. I mean, obviously he was also, terribly trained and went off to straight blast as an awful mistake. But, it was also that he would have learned better things if he wasn't just at risk of getting melted the whole time. Yeah. And, Morales clearly can take that time, and he's going to be able to learn in ways that other people simply can't.
Yep. So, that does make me interested in a long view kind of way in Morales.
Mm-hmm.
This discussion more than the fight itself has made me think, all right, I'm going to be willing to sit through however many more deeply unsatisfying performances he has left to give us, thinking that there's a pretty high chance he will emerge on the other side of whatever that first real barrier is, an improved fighter. And maybe he won't. We've seen plenty of other superior athletes who the lesson they learn is they take it too hard and it just completely messes up their game or whatever. But Morales does look to me like a truly spirited competitor who will probably do everything he can to adapt when he finally needs to adapt.
Yeah. And, it doesn't look like he's trained super well, so it is going to be an example. It's probably, unless he goes somewhere else, it's probably going to be an example of watching someone essentially learn through fighting.
Yep.
You are getting to watch to watch someone develop in the most organic of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he should be. He's fun to watch. I mean, he's definitely he will be interesting to watch, and yeah, I think he is at this point just the physical freak of his division.
Yes, yeah, that thought did cross my mind when they did the now traditional cut to the winning fighter's corner at the moment of victory. And one of his coaches in particular, like, didn't even celebrate. He just looked very smug. And I was like, I mean, how much do you think you really are responsible for what just happened?
Yeah.
Like, this guy's been pretty much exactly the same fighter this entire time in the UFC. I've seen very little signs of technical progression or growth in strategic thinking or anything. And, but he's just going out there not learning because he doesn't have to. And I'm like, I don't know. You know, who knows what the dynamic is there, but, he is just one of those fighters you get the feeling would flourish at SBG, you know?
Yep.
They would not be able to make him an ineffective fighter. They would not be able to turn him into current Johnny Walker. He's just not, he's that kind of talent. And so maybe, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
Don't be too smug when he just continues crushing people, because you might be building up a stock of embarrassment to feel when he finally just gets completely outfoxed by somebody that you really think he should be able to crush like he has all the others. You never know.
Yeah, one of those ones where the corner suddenly like, he goes back after just being worked over, and they're just like, we need to go after him. We need to do it.
Be first.
Need to get him. Get him.
Put your hands up. Yeah, they have literally nothing constructive to tell him. Yeah, that seems likely too. But I'm willing to say he'll be good. Mm-hmm. He's already pretty good, but he'll be good in the way that you and I want him to be eventually.
Yep. Yeah, I think, you know, David Onoma, for example, is another example of someone who just has enough physical gifts to just continually carry them through.
Yeah.
But just simply perhaps not even as much for his division as Morales does for welterweight.
Right. Because Morales he seems to have every physical gift you could ask for. He seems to have the durability. He seems to be impossible to tire out. He has big power. He's fast, and he's a giant.
Mm-hmm.
Every advantage you could ask for, this guy has it in spades. So I think he is a rare kind of specimen as far as prospects go.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Well, let's take our first break there. When we come back, we're just going to pick up a variety of scraps from this card. Sadiq Yusuff versus Myron Santos was interesting. Melquizael Costa versus Julian Erosa was just a barrel of laughs. And that sounds condescending. What I mean is it was really fun and a great fight. Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll find time to talk about Jared Gordon knocking out Thiago Moises as well, whatever else. And then we're going to get on to our topic, which I promise you is much more interesting than we managed to make it sound at the start, which will be the concept of rhythm and tempo in fighting. Just stick with us. It's really a very interesting thing, but I don't know how to make that clear without getting into it. Segment 3, I promise, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, let's talk about some of these Morales-Burns undercard fights. Of course, the co-main event was a lightweight showdown between Myron Santos and Sodiq Yusuff. Myron Santos, of course, had a disgusting knockout in what I believe was his UFC debut. Came back and fought Francis Marshall in a fight where most people thought Marshall got robbed. He came into this one. Again, we did not discuss this at all, Phil, even less than we did outside of last week's episode for the main event. We didn't mention it once, but I feel beholden or behooved, as MMA guru might say, or was it the Weasel? I feel behooved to tell you.
Oh.
That
God, I'm so glad I don't know that.
Okay. It was just Jack Slack making fun of the classic dumb guy move of using vocabulary you don't understand. I feel behooved to tell you that this was somewhat of another JDM versus Muhammad style classic Conor Rebush pick, in that I was like, I know Sodiq Yusuff on paper should be better than Myron Santos, but I just have a feeling he's not going to be able to keep his foot on the gas in any functional way well enough to not continually give Myron Santos chances. And yep, that was how it played out. Sodiq Yusuff, I'm afraid to say, is a bit of a mortally broken fighter at this point.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you had like an insightful read on this one, because I don't think I'd really twigged before you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Just before we started recording.
Well, the main thing that jumped out at me about this was Sodiq Yusuff's positioning, his stance, and how he approaches like the limits of striking range. This is certainly something I've noticed for a long time. Like, but I maybe use different terms, or I think of it more pointedly now. Like, for example, I could Frankie Edgar all the time back when he was still, in an endless number of title fights. And I was like, Frankie Edgar.
Like when you used to hate him.
Yeah. Even after I learned to love him, I was still like, Frankie Edgar, is really bad positionally. He is constantly squaring himself up to his opponent and essentially just exposing the entirety of his center line. By the way, just a small aside, I feel very gratified by this. Have you caught how frequently the term center line is being used in MMA corners nowadays?
No.
Coaches are out there talking about this shit.
Maybe, yeah.
I feel in my own small way, somewhat responsible for that. That this is a conceptual thing that coaches have become aware of and are actually like openly discussing with their fighters. Like, hey, you should try to protect your center line. You should try to hide the opponent's way into your stance and into your grill. And you should try to move around so you can expose his. Like, it's funny because you never hear this in boxing corners because it's such a fundamental part of boxing that, like, it is a bit of a joke still about MMA striking that they're in there talking about, like, positioning 101 in the corner. But hey, you got to start somewhere. And I do feel a little gratified that I keep noticing coaches telling their fighters to watch their center line. It's a good thing to be teaching. Sodiq Yusuff, though, like Frankie Edgar before him, is almost perpetually setting himself up in what I think of as the I'm about to throw a right hand position. Right? Because your default position, your left side is like your shield. You keep your left shoulder and your left hand and your left foot between the opponent and your chin and the center line that follows down from your chin. You hide behind that left side. And it is both a physical shield in that it makes it harder for stuff to get past the barrier, and it's a dynamic shield because your jab is on that line, on the lead side line, and the jab is a threat that makes people not want to close the distance and try to expose your center. And in order to throw a right hand, you usually have to use your jab to then momentarily expose yourself by stepping off to the left with your lead foot and squaring yourself up a little bit to bring the right hand into line with the target. And that's why you use your jab, because this is a vulnerable position to be in. Or a feint or whatever. This is why you have to set up the right hand. And Sadiq Yusuff in this fight with Myron Santos, you can go back and watch it with this in mind and just see that he is like perpetually standing square to his opponent as if he's looking for a right hand. But what this results in is a fight where Myron Santos can throw basically any straight down the middle shot he wants and just kind of land with shocking accuracy on Sadiq Yusuff. And that to me was the deciding factor of the fight, is that Yusuff was just always in a vulnerable position and could not even get to a range where like Myron Santos couldn't just get a free shot off on him.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's got a lot of explanatory power as well for like a lot of his previous losses and struggles.
Yeah.
And the fights, I mean, and yeah, I think it's also that he's been, I think this is, you know, a product of Team Lloyd Irvin in some ways, because he does remind me in that way, now that I think of it, of like Mike Easton and other products who came out of that gym.
Yeah. Sihara Eubanks.
Yeah. And it's the fact that it's like you're building someone in the image of a defensive fighter without actually giving them the tools to be one.
Yeah.
Like you're basically making someone who actually looks like they're a poised, coherent stance. You know, if you showed this to someone, who showed it to me, I would just be like, yeah, sure, he looks like he's in a, you know, he's ready to defend strikes, and he's, you know, Sadiq Yusuff is a clean technical kickboxer who has some defensive deficiencies, but I don't think I would pick up on that specific way that they've built these fighters to be, because they've mostly built them to be like slow-paced, defensive kickboxers without giving them the actual tools to be that, which I think is probably like a very good reason for why people from this gym have simply capped out at a very specific point every single time.
They are just by default defensively vulnerable. Yeah,
because a square stance is not necessarily, it's not necessarily a death sentence, but you just gotta, apart from anything else, you just gotta have like a lot of hand traffic out there.
Yeah.
If you think of like, Rothwell or Foreman or whatever, who fought from, very squared up stances.
Mm-hmm.
But they were constantly looking to intercept strikes, bat them down with the right hand, and use the squarer stance, to be able to throw more ambiguous shots from either side, because they're in range to throw their right hand without having to step forward into it and that kind of stuff. You need to just keep pace and traffic up from the offensive and defensive side, respectively. But yeah, with Yusuff, it's that he's been put into this sort of it's like medium-paced kickboxing, like Aldo without the defense kind of approach.
You know who's another fighter in MMA that this happened to? King Mo. King Mo, I actually know a little bit of the background on it because I'm going to get the names wrong. I'll probably mix them up. But he worked with two different Mayweathers as a boxing coach. And I think initially he was working with Roger Mayweather, who, looked like Floyd Sr. and Jr. for the most part when he was himself a boxer. Like they had that family style. And he was not like a particularly deep boxer, but you can go back and watch like his fight with Roger Gracie. And you can see that his positioning is like that. He's keeping that lead shoulder up in front of his chin. He's standing quite side on. And, you know, he was still like super right hand happy, but he was landing those right hands as like big decisive counters because the opponents were actually having quite a hard time of getting to his chin. And then he started working with, I can't remember his name. It's like, he's like the black sheep of the Mayweather, that generation of Mayweather siblings. It's not Roger. Is there a Freddie Mayweather or something? I'm embarrassed. I'm forgetting his name right now, but
outrageous.
You know, probably in Mo's mind, he was like, I'm just going to get to another Mayweather. My boxing's going to be great. And there is a transformation at that like early stage of his MMA career where he's suddenly coming out to fights and being very, very square and having a much higher like two-handed guard. And he just became way more hittable.
Jeff,
that's it.
Jeff
Mayweather.
Yeah.
And he just became way more hittable and like could not initiate exchanges without being just as vulnerable as his opponent. And he became way more like, this is jumping ahead to his fight with, what's his name? Crazy, weird spin hardcore guy, Emmanuel something.
Emmanuel Newton.
Yeah. By the point of that fight, he is in like the second iteration of his boxing game. And it placed a much higher premium on his ability to accurately see shots coming and slap them down with parries or catch them or block them. And that's just, especially because this is MMA, I would do everything in my power in training a fighter to not force them to make accurate moment-to-moment defensive reads in the pocket. I would say the best principle is to start from a position which is more secure and know that you have certain ways to get out of it to be offensively potent. But if you get back to that fundamental position, you're going to be fundamentally hard to hit. And yeah, so he's another example of somebody who you can actually see two different versions of Mo Lawal, with these two different approaches. And I would argue that the first one had a lot more potential to make him a credible MMA striker. And the second one led to him getting into a bunch of silly, messy fights where fighters who look much worse than him in so many ways were just able to hit him for free. So,
yeah.
Take a look at that next time Sadiq Yusuff fights. Be like, wait a minute, this guy is just constantly letting his opponent look right at the middle of his chest. And maybe that's bad, and you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, it was a good call.
Thank you. What about Melquizael Costa and Julian Erosa? That happened on this card as well. This was a banger of a fight.
This was great. This was just a mirror match, right?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, they're very different fighters in other ways too. Costa was way faster. Erosa is a guy who is chronically vulnerable in the first round, right? And that very nearly led to an early finish.
Yep.
But Melquizael, yeah, go on, please.
That's not really a terribly large amount to say, but it's like, but yeah, Erosa's very vulnerable and still more so in any fight where he's not insulated by his reach.
Yeah.
And that was this fight for sure. But he's just so willing to fire and return, and that, yeah, Costa just couldn't find any way to be safe against him. And by the end of the fight, Erosa had just like turned into the Terminator. And yeah, I mean, probably would have in fact benefited from perhaps not basically immediately emptying his gas tank every time the slightest fraction of gas leaks back into it. He was just constantly running on empty, throwing everything he had at all points in that last round, which was an amazing display of will, but maybe also not one which, if he just gathered himself, he might have actually been able to really get something done in that
He was
round.
not able to recognize he'd actually put Costa at a bit of an energy deficit at that point. Costa was definitely losing gas and had the entire fight up to that point just been willingly cornering himself. Like, this is, you know, a problem with Costa's is that in a lot of ways he's clearly a very good fighter. He's got a deep well of techniques in every phase. He's fast, like he just seems all around to be a pretty good athlete. He's really tough. Absolutely comfortable if he has to exchange and in accepting those exchanges and trying to fire back. But he's a very disordered fighter, like conceptually. That he's got no cage craft. He's got no ability to like really build any kind of attack on an opponent. 'Cause he's very kind of grab baggy with his, offensive arsenal. And this was a great example of that like, by the time Julian Erosa was just able to take the shots and realized he needed to pressure like mad, Costa just started losing the exchanges that he was winning very clearly in the beginning of the fight. He just started losing more and more of them. And he couldn't figure out a way to stop those exchanges from happening at all. The fight just kept coming to him and he had no choice but to accept it because no cagecraft, no distance management, no conceptual framework to his striking game at all, really. No process. I think that's the word we like to use.
Yep. But yes, you are right. Yeah, especially looking back at that first round, the speed difference is marked.
It's immense, yeah. So, you know, there were a couple other interesting things that happened on this card. Jared Gordon finally got a decisive win. Very funny that it was, it must have been a result which has reinforced to Thiago Moises what he has sort of tacitly known his entire career, which is that you never ever try to lead on anybody.
Oh, yeah.
Never lead.
Why would you want to do that?
Make them go first and then punish them. And by gum, he tried to step in with a left hook and got absolutely flattened. So it turns out he was right all along. Never go first.
And by Jared Gordon, no less.
Yeah, noted power puncher and actual good friend of Bilal Muhammad, Jared Gordon, who just went out there and scored. I mean, when's the last time Jared Gordon got a knockout? It must be pre-UFC.
A finish?
Oh, he TKO'd Mark Madsen. I forgot about that one. Pretty recently. Who is like 39 years old. And in fact, in his first UFC fight back in 2017, he TKO'd Michael Quinones. So there have been a couple. They're still pretty spread out and few and far between. He's a cool fighter, and I'm glad to see him do well. Oh yeah, I love Jared Gordon. I really enjoy watching him fight, and I'm always gutted when he has, you know, not all of these bad decisions are like pure robberies. Even the Paddy Pimblett fight, it's like he didn't do himself any favors in actually making that win as convincing as it should have been. So it's a mix of him not quite being up to par or not being able to convince himself that he is, and also just, you know, being in there against people who are in many ways naturally better at this game. But the man has clearly done a lot of hard work to make himself into the best possible fighter that Jared Gordon can be. And I find it very gratifying to see him get a big result like this, even if it was over oh shit, I was going to say old. Thiago Moises is 30. Can you believe that?
What?
Is that a typo? He was born in 1995.
What?
It seems wrong, doesn't
it? Yeah. He's got to be at least 35, right?
That's kind of what I was thinking. I was about to just say off the cuff, a 36-year-old or whatever. I had that in my head. Nope. Mm-hmm. That means when he debuted in the UFC in 2018, you're better at math than me, Phil. How old does that make him?
Sorry, I wasn't paying
That
attention.
makes him 23. He was 23 when he fought Beneil Dariush in his UFC debut. That doesn't seem right.
And he started fighting when he was 17.
Well, there you go. He's a young veteran.
Yeah, and he was fighting Jason Knight when he was 4 years into his MMA career, and Danny Castillo, 4 years in. I never really thought of Moises as being that kind of guy. Just in the deep end right from the beginning.
Might have changed the way that I viewed him all this time if I had been keeping it in my head that he's a real young veteran.
100%. Yeah, 100%. He's just a young veteran, and he's someone who's just been in the Shark Tank his entire career.
Well, that's funny. It's funny to take this long to realize that he's.
I would have been like, 36, 37, 38. 100%. I'm shocked.
It just goes to show what we know. All right. Well, let's take another break on that humorous note. And when we come back, we have what I swear to you is an interesting topic to discuss after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about time in fighting. And I suppose we'll get into this the way we got into it before, because we weren't even sure it would be a topic that would yield much discussion, but it turned out that it did. And our favorite kind of topic, Phil, right? In which I get to talk about chess and you get to talk about Tekken.
Hooray!
But I promise this has real application to prize fighting. All right. So when I say time, what I'm referring to, in a sense, are the building blocks of initiative. And the term is tempo. A tempo is defined as the amount of time it takes to carry out a single simple action. So whether it's a jab or a cross or a pivot or a slip or a parry, offensive, defensive, positional, whatever kind of move you're executing, it generally is taken to take one tempo to carry out. And I've grown to appreciate this from chess, which is not quite like fighting because it is turn-based, but it is a one-on-one adversarial contest in which initiative is very, very important. The only combat athletes I know of who actually openly talk about the gaining of tempo are fencers. Like, that's a thing where fencing students will be on fucking fencing subreddits being like, oh, this is a half tempo move, or this is an exchange of tempi. This is how you gain a tempo on the opponent. But let me give a brief example to explain how this works. Okay, so in order to land, let's say, a right hand on the opponent, and listen up, Sadiq Yusuff. The way to land a right hand on the opponent is to get into range, and to do so while getting to the right angle. But let's just keep it simple and say you have to get into range to land the right hand. And the simplest way of doing that is to take a step forward. But if you do that, if you just take a step forward, your opponent has that tempo to smack you in the face and interrupt your advance before you can actually achieve your goal. You have given them a tempo. Now, if you start back from extreme range and you want to close again to land your right hand, this time you can step in and at the same moment give a feint or a jab, something that the opponent feels compelled to react to defensively. And in that way, you gain a tempo even as you expend the tempo of moving forward. And so you get in there in good time and can then launch your right hand pretty safely and force the opponent at the very least to react to that in turn, if not just hitting them with it cleanly. So that's like the base level of what I'm talking about here. This is a very broad concept that, again, it doesn't get discussed openly in any way that I've ever seen in boxing or kickboxing or MMA, but I think it is a very useful thing to think about. And it is a thing that perhaps a lot of fighters could benefit from actually being openly taught. You know, I sort of got into this last week when we talked about JDM Muhammad and the recurring motif where he would seem to bite on a feint from Bilal and would then slip, but Bilal wouldn't actually fire the shot he was slipping, and JDM would not waste that tempo. He would use it just as if he had led with a jab and come back with the slip counter anyway, even though it was no longer really even a counter. Because on some level, probably unconsciously in his mind, if he has expended a tempo to get into this position and nothing has happened, he now has a small initiative. And he can just go out there and execute what would have been a counter had the slip actually served its primary purpose. The point is that even if his intent was not to threaten Muhammad with that slip, he got Muhammad watching him and thinking reactively with the slip. And so he may as well use that time advantage to strike him. And this kind of thing comes up all the time. I think this is really what you're seeing when you watch an impressive performance and you get the sense of one opponent always being a step ahead of their opponent in a scramble or an exchange or whatever. I think what you're really seeing is that they are just perpetually one tempo ahead of the opponent, that they are constantly using what in chess would be called forcing moves that compel the opponent to react, to then exploit their reaction and go like deeper into that sequence, still holding a time advantage. That's how you stay ahead of an opponent. And somehow it should be a back and forth scramble or a back and forth exchange, but you're constantly, almost supernaturally it seems sometimes, reading their intentions and punishing them for every attempt they make to try to get some initiative back for themselves. So you had a parallel to this from your long experience with the game of Tekken.
Yeah, I mean, I think because there's a way of looking at the options in like both combat and stuff like Tekken as just being an option tree, right? You go from A to B, and at each point you have a series of options open to you. And I think, and you can sort of think about, if you think about this from like the basic perspective, from an offensive standpoint, let's say from a Tekken standpoint, from an offensively, you can move forward, you can attack with a high or a mid or a low, you can attack the various levels that you're approaching of the opponent, or you can try and throw them, or you can try and intercept their sidestep. But whatever, you have a series of offensive options, and your opponent also has access to a series of defensive options.
Right.
They can sidestep themselves, they can backdash away, they can simply mash buttons to stop you from getting in on them. And it's always worth thinking that these options can change with rhythm, and they often change in sometimes they change in predictable ways, but in fact they almost always do, but the way that they change is dependent on the person in question.
Right.
So for example, there's the example in Tekken, there are moves which are punishable on block. So you block a move, and then you simply get to return with a free move that hits the opponent without them being able to guard it. And it's a risk to do these kind of moves.
Yeah, they're committal attacks. To bring it back into the context of actual fighting, they're fully committal attacks where, if it doesn't succeed, the opponent just gets an opportunity to answer.
Yep. But what can happen is that you can do one of these punishable moves. If the opponent does not recognize that it's punishable, sometimes they're not dialed in enough that they don't punish it. Most people then immediately recognize they miss the punishment window, they miss the time to get their guaranteed punishment, and then they will often try and mix you up instead. They'll be like, oh, I missed the punishment, but it is my turn. And then they'll go for like a guess between a mid or a low option, right? And in this case, it's a very common thing for the person who has attacked and done a punishable move. They've lost lots of initiative, to mash, to hit random buttons. This is something that would happen even at the very highest level. And for the person who gets hit by this, they can get incredibly upset because they're like, this was a punishable move, aka you were going to get hit for free, and then you swung. Why did you swing? They swung because they knew that period of time where they could be punished had passed, and then they've learned through repetition that if the person hasn't immediately punished me, they are at least going to try and take their turn back.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just swing with a big counter hit, with a big button that does like lots of damage. And this is an incredibly infuriating thing to happen to you, but it happens all the time. And it also happens with not just examples when people are blocking things, but when they're making small errors just moving around. People will miss something and then immediately hit a button because you try and rush in afterwards. And what this comes down to, what this kind of implies is that, well, the mind game that this generates is one where you have to figure out not necessarily just the option, not just the option tree that your opponent is using, but how that option tree is affected by the rhythm that they're operating in. Because there's lots of people who, as I said, they will have their first layer where they'll have access to all their defensive options that they can think of. So sidestep, backdashing, blocking, or whatever. They'll have access to all of it.
Right.
And they'll have a second layer where maybe they'll have a much more limited amount of responses. So they'll be like, I will either guess mid or low, or I will mash. And then what happens is that their ability to navigate deeper into their ability to navigate sort of the complexity of their option tree shrinks the deeper into an exchange they go.
Right.
They'll have 5 options in the first exchange. In the first beat, they'll generally have like 2 or 3 in the second beat if they're good. Sometimes some people will have like 1 or 2, and they will be bad players. And then they will have less and less as time goes on, and only the very, very best players will have the ability to maintain access to all of their defensive options, multiple sort of tempos, multiple rhythm, multiple steps into a rhythm. So it's really and it's really noticeable that like this is something which only like I'm not sure even many MMA fighters have this. Most of them, again, they have maybe 1 or 2 steps worth of defensive options.
Yeah.
And then they're just in full bailout mode. You know, the level of the complexity of their options simply diminishes down to nothing very quickly.
They
because
either
the other thing
close
is
their eyes and swing, or they turn and run along the fence. They do something that they know they definitely should not be doing, but they get overloaded and just feel themselves too far behind in time and initiative in the exchange, and just have to bail somehow.
Yep. And it's also very noticeable and again, for very obvious reasons. This is much easier to do offensively than it is defensively.
Yeah.
Like, as a player, I think I have good offensive rhythm and a good understanding of what all my options are offensively. And I'm quite willing to go deep into guesses against, anyone or whatever. But I'm much less good at it defensively because it's extremely difficult to do.
Yeah.
It's one thing to be able to navigate, lots of complex decision trees. It's another to do that when those decision trees kind of feel like they're decaying in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is, I think, as you said before, this is probably one of the reasons why, go forward wins in MMA is possible because it's just much easier to mix up your rhythm offensively than it is to keep up with rhythm defensively.
Yeah. Once you get that first...
Very difficult to do.
Once you get that first, I think the term that I still use now and then that you invented, Phil, once you get that first wedge in the door, that first little taste of initiative, it's much easier to just continue building on that time advantage. You throw a 1-2, the opponent puts their guard up, and now you can, your options are open. You can rip to the body, you can fire an uppercut. Even if you do that and it is defended, you still feel much freer to keep that flow going. You also have the luxury of being able to just keep buying time with non-committal shit, right? Like, I'll think again about this fundamental difference between Leon Edwards and Jack Della Maddalena as opponents for Bilal Muhammad. That fight with Muhammad had with Leon Edwards, one little bit of initiative was repeatedly allowed to turn into just like an unstoppable tide of overwhelming complexity for Leon Edwards. And Bilal's not the only guy who's managed to do this. Sean Brady did the same shit to him one fight later, even seemingly being at more of a striking advantage in the early going. He knew that if he kept that pressure on, he was going to be able to put Leon in these positions where he had to do some kind of one-size-fits-all, some kind of bailout option because he could no longer keep up with the complexity of the exchange. And then you look at Bilal versus JDM, and it is so clearly different. JDM is definitely operating on a much higher level of comfort as a boxer in the context of MMA, where you can get him to, you can jab and he'll pull and you jab again and he slips and you fire the right hand and maybe it hits him because he was thinking about countering you. But when that exchange recurs, you'll double jab, he'll pull, slip, you throw the right hand and he will go a different way. He'll tack on another defensive movement. And then it often happened that Bilal would make the right adjustment offensively. He would have it solved and that would immediately lead to a reversal of momentum because he would kind of freeze up and Della Maddalena could then just start piling back onto him. Or Della Maddalena would get stuck against the fence and go into a sort of really reliable rhythm where he was like, I'll pop a shot in, he's going to fire back, I'll slip it, I'll fire off that slip with a counter, and he's going to fire back again, and at that moment, I'll slip the other way and pivot out. That's a reliable way to get out by just forcing Muhammad into this rhythmic exchange where he has a better ability to recognize this exchange of tempi and then use one at the right time for a non-offensive move, for a positional move.
Yep.
Because that's a very important thing in fighting is understanding how to gain time to do all of the non-sexy stuff that doesn't immediately result in the opponent getting hit in the face. You need all the positional adjustments. You need the advancing steps and the retreating steps and the pivots and the side steps. You need the level changes, but all of these things cost time. And in order to be able to execute them, you have to be able to ride the cutting edge of that initiative. You have to be able to make the opponent react and then be bold enough, be poised enough to just do a thing which is not immediately offensive in nature. which then gives you an opportunity to be incredibly effective with your offense by getting to the right angle or getting into range, right? Whatever. But like another guy to look at for this, I would say who is a master of this aspect of fighting is Vasily Lomachenko. You can go and watch Lomachenko's fight with Guillermo Rigondeaux, who is a brilliant defensive fighter. But very quickly into that fight, Lomachenko just completely has his number because he is able to offer some threat, which puts Rigondeaux into a position where he's not only mentally are his options limited, but it's a little different from Tekken because mechanically your options become limited when you're in a certain position. If you slip hard to your right, most of your weight's on your right foot and you're in a lowered position, you no longer have access to all the moves you did when you were in your like neutral stance. In some ways that's helpful because it can be easier to learn those patterns and not get overwhelmed by, what's the term? Analysis paralysis, right? I've only got, when I'm in this position, I've only got like 2 or 3 moves I can make from here. That can be helpful. But if the opponent is able to put you in those positions and then use the time you spend executing that defense to like, as Lomachenko did to Rigondeaux, pivot to the right and be standing completely behind you, you're going to be, you've lost too much time and you're going to have to bail out. And he's probably going to snag a clean shot on you in the process of you bailing out. Which is the other thing that makes striking so much more beautiful to me, but so much harder to teach on this conceptual level than like grappling, is that the advantage of a good position is in the moment that your opponent is forced to take that position away. It's not like,
well, I would imagine this functions almost exactly the same way in grappling. It's simply, as in most cases, it's simply harder to see and visualize.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that this interplay doesn't happen, but there is somewhat of an advantage of time passing a little more slowly in grappling, where you can actually secure a position well enough that your opponent has to give a much more concerted effort to get out. And yeah, you are still, like we look at guys like what Sean Brady did to Leon Edwards, when we talk about him putting him in a pick your poison kind of position, like there's immense pressure on you. You have 2 ways out. I'm ready to punish either one. And by limiting his options, he's able to stay ahead of him in that way. So it totally does apply. But the striking is very fluid in a way that grappling isn't, where the moment to capitalize is usually as the advantage is vanishing. I get an angle on you. You immediately take a step to take that angle away, and it's while you're expending that offensively empty tempo to make that positional move that I have to hit you. And if I don't, then the position is gone, and we're back to square one. We're neutral again.
Yes. And yeah, it's worth noting that whilst this is, in some way, sort of out-processing your opponent, this is a very different kind of out-processing to the way that you might necessarily expect. Like, for example, like Carlos Condit would be someone who would simply overload people by giving them too much to think about. But he would just go, 1-2 body kick, 1-2 head kick, 1-2, and it would all be, he would simply be throwing too much at too many different levels for the opponent to keep up with, and he would be able to out-process them in terms of what he was doing.
But mostly the same rhythm, and it really depended on his ability to absorb the punishment that it cost to continually throw these questions at the opponent, right? Doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah, but the ability to use rhythm and positioning is one which allows fighters to much more effectively pare down the options which they're using to respond, and the both the types and the risk of the way that they respond to it. And so, yeah, it is something where I think it becomes essentially a safer way to determine what an opponent's tendencies are.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can figure out not only the ability to determine not only how does this person respond, but not only, at what sort of timings do they respond, but to be able to combine those things can allow you to really shut down what they can be offering.
Yeah.
And as you said, like this requires I think, a positional toolkit and a understanding of defense, which pretty much mostly doesn't exist in MMA, let's be honest.
Yeah, and it requires, even in like boxing, it requires an immense amount of drilling, because in order to be able to execute all the different options of this flowchart, this decision tree in good time, it has to be muscle memory. It has to be reflexive. It can't be logical thought, because the brain works too slowly. It has to be the nervous system itself making these decisions and just responding to stimuli immediately. So it requires a lot of very focused drilling. But that's why I think it's worth actually thinking of this concept more openly, because if you recognize that, then it might change the way that you approach your training and how you prepare. And it might make things which often seem impressive but ultimately kind of useless, like long drawn out combination drills on the pads, into something which is actually very useful, where we are training ourselves to go deeper into exchanges and trying to maintain this advantage of time all the way to the end, and always having these multitude of offensive options to go to keep the opponent behind, to keep them overwhelmed. Another fight that happened recently, which I think is a good illustration of this concept, was Gary Prates. I said when we talked about it that Prates' big crime was wasting time, and this is kind of what I was talking about without defining it so clearly, that Gary was able to feed Prates threats, which he would respond to with purely defensive moves, and was then able to build up a lead on him by not just stacking on punches, but like using that response to then step off to the side or get closer or whatever. And that turned around as Gary got a little tired and Prates got more determined, where early in the fight, Prates was getting punished for just trying to step in without gaining any time. Later in the fight, Gary started respecting the simple fact of Prates stepping in as if it was in itself an offensive move. And even if it was no more of an actual threat than it was earlier, the simple fact that Gary started respecting it and conceding ground or giving away angles or putting up some kind of defensive response suddenly made Prates' continued willingness to simply step forward a very good way of gaining time and drowning Gary with deeper exchanges. You could see both sides of this interplay in that one fight, where,
100%.
So, it may seem very abstract, like I said, but I really do think it's worth thinking of like fight analysis, not just in terms of like, this is how you throw a jab, this is how you stand, when you slip, you're loading up this punch, whatever, all of these technical details. But this underlying concept of initiative and the exchange of tempi, which really drives all of those technical decisions and makes them work. It changes how you look at, like, okay, you're supposed to hide your center line. It changes how you think of that simple positional rule when you think, okay, the opponent has to spend time exposing your center line, which gives you a chance to punish them, right? It is really like an undergirding concept, I think, to so much of not just MMA, but like I said, Tekken, obviously, chess. I'm sure it exists in like tennis and volleyball. Like when you get into a long volley with the opponent, these kinds of little tricks and split-second decisions become very important. And how to draw your opponent out of position and then use that time that they've lost to punish them by hitting the ball to a different part of the court or whatever. Any kind of one-on-one adversarial, like inherently combative contest has this concept of time underlying it. So it's instructive to think about.
I think it is.
All right. Well, I hope you out there find that topic as interesting as I obviously do. And of course, anytime Phil and I both if I get to talk even very obliquely about chess and then Phil gets to talk quite in depth about Tekken, we're both happy. So finding those parallels. But I think that will pretty much do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We will be back next week. Unfortunately, we have a really dire-looking Apex card on the horizon. We'll keep our eyes open for anything else, any other timely combat sports things that are happening in other sports, other organizations. Failing that, we'll probably talk about the main event and something else, but we may very well try another segment 3 topic that interests us. So feel free in the comments or on social media to let us know if you want to, if you have any other ideas for things you'd like to hear us talk about. And it doesn't have to be this like fucking academic. It can be like our other topic idea was let's rank all the current UFC divisions and which one do we think is the healthiest, or let's rank the champions in the context of the Dricus du Plessis era. Who seems the most unlike what we consider a normal championship level fighter. Those are viable topics for us too. We're lowbrow as well as highbrow, I promise. So if you want to do that, feel free to leave it in the comments on the YouTube version of this episode. Otherwise, find us on social media. You can, of course, reach out to Phil and I on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson or at Boxing Bush. You can find me on Blue Sky at King Typo. And also, check out patreon.com/heavyhands, the first episode of this May edition of Heavy Hanka, on which Miguel Class and I talk about the full 15 days of a grand sumo tournament, has already gone up. So go check that out. If you're not already into sumo, you may find our passion for it infectious, because it is, in many ways, a breath of fresh air coming from watching so many UFC cards. So please check that out and hear me and Miguel talk about sumo. We have a good time doing it. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.